Night. With me today, I've got Rose Horowitz, and we're going to be talking about her journey. Now, lots of people talk about her journey, but Rose has got a really interesting one. For start, she started as a journalist and did some really cool stuff. But the second thing is that she's a great. I was thinking about this before we started. One of also the things that you've done is that you worked in a very male orientated world. You climbed to the top, and then you threw a rope down for other women to basically climb up.
That's a great way to look at it.
And because I was trying to think of a story and a metaphor. I mean, you were a massive give backer in the way that some of the things that we're going to talk about. So it's not just about tell you a story. So my business partner, Adam Gray, his daughter is just 21, but when she was 16, she said to him, "Daddy, who is it that I should look up to in the world?" Because there's lots of bald, white male people out there, and I don't really, it's something I don't really empathize with them. Who is it that I can actually look up to? And I think this is it's a really important point that, as I say, we've got enough bald white men. What can we do to get other people to come along and to be inspirational? And your journey is inspirational, I think, and well, I know that because I've got proof of it. So why don't you start off with your stuff in journalism, because it's an interesting story.
Okay.
Why don't you start off with that?
Okay. Well, I was an English major, but I decided that, I sort of always, at 10 years old, I had started the Horowitz family newspaper. So, and so I had want ads at the time. And my dad had been was a reporter for Variety for 9 years, covering television in the early days of, Ed Moreau and, things. So, I remember going with him into the newsroom, and it was really green shade, and they had his green, Variety pencils. Anyway, but I always loved to write, and I also write poetry. But I thought, having a career in journalism would be more lucrative than being a poet. And I went to the Columbia School of International Public Affairs, and had a few, had some great professors. It was a great environment. I had some internships. I was an intern at the UN. And as I look back now, what I chose to study there was women at the UN.
Right.
So, yeah. So I had interviewed like 20 women. And so it was like the state of women at the UN. And once I did that, I said, no, I'm not going to go to the UN. But it was very interesting. And I had an internship at the Associated Press, and it was cool. I would go with a New York City reporter, and if big cardinal was retiring at St. Patrick's Cathedral, I would go, and we would both come back to the newsroom. And I mean, my story didn't go anywhere, but I got to see what he did,
the process.
And when I was about to graduate, I got a call from editor in Pittsburgh who said, "Hey, Rose, Pete Matisse here. What are you up to?" So I went to Pittsburgh. I had lived in New York City my whole life, and it was cool. I was opening the bureau at 6 a.m, and looking at local papers and writing copy for noon, for radio. And it was sink or swim. I mean, nobody was actually in the office until, I guess, 8:30, 9 o'clock. But I loved it. And I did a similar short-term stint in Charleston, West Virginia, which was that was another world.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
And everybody knew I was, they called police stations. They say, you're a Yankee, I can tell, It's like, yeah. And then I came to back to New York City, and worked for a paper that at the time it's still in existence as a website, but it's the Journal of Commerce, which was a daily business paper that competed long in the 50s. They competed with the Wall Street Journal, and I started covering international shipping and transportation and trade. And I don't know. I really loved getting scoops. Really loved that. And
But you were in a hotel, weren't you? And someone shoved an envelope under the door.
no, it was actually no. It was somebody did it in the newsroom.
Okay.
Somebody shoved an manila envelope. No, nothing. No identification on it, and it was alleging that this certain company was hogging all the bids
Yep.
to ship U.S. cargo, to ship cargo to the U.S. Food for Peace program in Africa, in the Sudan. And my editor at the time, who was great, he said, "Hey, take a look at this, Rose." And he gave it to me, and I ran with it, and it turned into an investigative series that they put me as a solo reporter to follow for 3 months. And I had a deep throat in DC who, I would give an alias, who was, somebody in government, and I would check, double check all my sources. So I had a lot of, some unnamed sources. And as we went to press, this big company, sent a fax to the paper saying, "We're gonna, if you proceed with this, we're gonna sue you."
Yeah.
But I wasn't worried because, it was Knight Ridder was behind us.
Right.
So that story led to the senators on the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Lugar at the time and Senator Leahy, saying, "Hey, what's going on with this bidding?" And they held hearings, and it resulted in a change of the way of the government. The government changed the process. It went from closed bidding to open bidding, so everyone could see what everybody's bid is, and there wouldn't be, the thing was that the food that was intended for Africa, some of that money was going in one middleman's, pocket.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember the time, and whatever happens, you want as much of the money to go to the people that of in need, don't you? So.
Yes, obviously, and U.S. law required U.S. ships to ship the goods, so there was no reason it should be closed.
And so did you win any awards for that, or?
I did. I won an Associated Press award, and I won. There's a group called World Hunger Year that was started by Harry Chapin and Bill Ayers, and I won the best investigative feature for that year. And the paper, that was the story. This 3-month investigation into U.S. Food for Peace was what the paper nominated me for. When I say I'm Pulitzer nominated, it was that series.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was great. I think that as a reporter, it's great to get headlines, but when you publish something that results in change, that is really gratifying.
And I think, and I think we all love that sort of thing. It's, as I agree with you, it's great writing, but writing, the pen is mightier than the sword, isn't it?
It was, unfortunately, and I found out a little later that the source I had in DC, who I thought, I was anonymous, was let go from his job.
Right.
It's hard to, I guess these things always get found out.
Yes.
But it wasn't the level of Watergate, but it was fun.
So you then went freelancing, didn't you? And you did some writing for Forbes and American Express.
Well, I wrote for the Journal of Commerce for 5 years. I did other investigative stories about a congressman, about counterfeit goods coming into New York City ports. I flew on a Black Hawk jet in Miami.
Wow.
I did. So talk about a male world. That was very male.
Yeah.
And from the U.S., from Homeland, the base there, and the story. I was covering a trade story, a shipping story, which was how drugs were coming into the U.S. And so I flew up on a plane where they go to find planes coming in, and it was a plane from Cuba, and you could see in the window like these boxes. But then they went into Cuban airspace, and the hunt ended. So so even though I was like a business reporter, I did do some I traveled to Japan as a exchange fellow, journalist program. So I did some really cool things. But after that, I went to another paper in Los Angeles. I went to live in LA, and I was writing for the Daily News of, which was in the Valley, Santa Clara Valley, and I was covering aerospace. And at the time, there was a big takeover bid launched, to take over Lockheed. So again, I was, getting great stories by, the employees were feeding me information, and the company was feeding me other information, and the idea was to beat the LA Times. So,
right. Yes.
Yeah.
But
then after that,
still investigating things at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. And breaking, scoop to scoop, a lot of scoops.
Cool. And then at what point did you discover social media?
Really, I guess I probably went on Facebook whenever, sometime when that came about. And then I think LinkedIn was the second one. And then I was starting to see that Twitter, that all these reporters were on Twitter. And I said to a friend of mine who had been at Columbia with me, he said, oh, well, if you're going to start on Twitter, you have to go to Sri Srinivasan in New York's, social media weekends, because, you're going to meet. And so I started to go to those, and I met this whole group of people, because in my own life, among my friends or family, no one was on Twitter. It was really foreign. And I said, this is cool. And I love that you could follow anyone, and you could start a conversation with anyone, mostly. So I just began to, use it. And then I guess I remember the power of it. I was, after Donald Trump was elected, I was at a rally at Penn America with poets and writers talking, famous ones. And a poet friend of mine was there to read. And Rita Dove, the poet who was a poet laureate in New York, in the States, read a poem. And I took video. And then a choir sang, and I said, I could put out a tweet with this. And I just had my phone, but I was able to check the song that the choir sang. I was able to check the name of the choir, take a quote from Rita Dove, from the video, edit the video, and put it out there. And it got retweeted by Penn America and other poets. And this had never really happened. That's sort of aha, oh wow, because everything was there in your phone.
Yes.
And I hadn't been in a newsroom, but there I could do everything. And so that was cool. And then in 2018, the way I don't know if you want to ask me about how Women to Follow started, or
yes. Well, I mean, the thing is that I wrote the word down, pivoted, in when we did the prep call, because you said you pivoted to Twitter. And then you said that you put out a tweet called saying, let's get this party started, which got 12 million impressions. Is that right?
It is. I just was exercising at the Y, came out, checked my phone, checked Twitter, and saw that this group, Gender Avenger, had put out a tweet about a study that, of the 3,500 reporters in DC, 82% of the men followed and retweeted men. And the same percentage was true for women. So what the hell, what is this? That's really crazy. So I put out a tweet that said, let's get this party started. I'm going to name 3 women to follow. And named women from Liza Donnelly, who's an artist, a cartoonist, to different. So I specifically named people in different fields. And I left and went to the library to write. And then, it was my Twitter feed, what was happening. And I think I came home that day. I said, something's happening on Twitter, So, and it just kept going with people all around the world naming women to follow, with the idea of lifting, women. And I went on a weekend New York Times read along and talked about it. And this group, Gender Avenger, asked me to write a blog about it. And a friend of mine was captivated by it, and she offered to start a Woman to Follow Twitter list which is now at 1,800 names.
Right.
And then, it was still like I didn't necessarily have an outlet, to write like a profile every month. So I said, okay, well, I was at the time, Twitter threads were just, starting to be popular. And I reached out and said, and asked Soraya Shemley, who is was head of the Women's Media Center in Washington, and was just coming out with a book called Rage Becomes Her. I thought, like, that is the perfect way to start this, series. And I interviewed her and wrote Twitter threads. So I wrote about 17 Twitter profiles of different women to follow. And the idea was, because there were women in tech, there was women in medicine, there was, but the idea that all of us should be lifting each other and knowing, about knowing our names.
Yeah. I mean, at the start, when I said throwing the rope down for other people to climb up, I mean, this is just a great example of using social media to empower people across the world.
Yes, it was global, and it was just, it was really awesome to see. And of course, then not that I didn't have a huge following, but I had a following where people who were named would often, would follow me, or they knew about Women to Follow. So when I called Soraya Shemley, she was already following me. I think because as a journalist, but then, she knew about Women to Follow. And so, I had this great access to get really terrific guests because I was known as the person, who founded this Women to Follow.
But that just about taking steps in terms of, we all love to be an overnight sensation, but, it took us 20 years to be an overnight sensation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And what that did is as your influence increased, it gave you access to more people or more things, and therefore you were able to increase your influence.
Yes. And it also made me aware of how passionate I was about women, empowerment. Yes. And, a few years ago, I found a poster that I had done. I had to be in like 16 in high school, and it was a big scale, and it was a collage, a scale, and it was men and women, and it were equal. So, yes. On a big red poster, which I still love red. And then, I found these pictures of myself, editorial meetings where I was talking to the chair of Archer Daniels Midland. And there I am, taking my notes, but, I'm surrounded the publisher, the editor, and most of them were bald, not yes. all, but, all white men.
It happens.
Yeah. And, and the field I was covering, business and international trade and, relations, there were there were women, but very few.
So bring us up to date with your various podcasts and producing and stuff, and explain about that, because that's empowering as well.
I after the series came out in a year and a half later, I'd done my profile, and then the pandemic hit, and this mentor, Sri Srinivasan, who taught journalism for 20 years at Columbia, and then was the head of the Met, and said he wanted to start an everyday live stream show about all aspects of the pandemic, with the idea of creating community, of people having a place to go and hear about, we did interview doctors, but I also interviewed Broadway people, and, what were they doing now? And, really all aspects, education, people who were starting, startups, to help with the pandemic, a chef, all these, what were people doing now? So it wasn't just about the medical aspect of it. So we did 250 consecutive daily shows consecutively. And it was just, Sri, who was usually the host, and myself, and a young woman who was just out of like grad school. And, it was over, we were all, so the two producers, and to do a daily show and, get multiple guests. And we also had, we were quite passionate about keeping it, gender and racial diversity.
Yes.
So of the 450 guests we had, 56% were women. I know
Okay.
many women of color. So, it was interesting to see that, how that played out. So, we
That's an
could do
awful
an
lot of
all
work.
female panel, but we didn't do an all male panel.
It's an awful lot of work.
So,
I mean,
yeah,
I run a podcast. I know how much effort it takes.
yeah. And I did, my responsibility was booking a lot of the guests and
Right.
also coming up with ideas and topics. And so one show I did, the pandemic in schools in Connecticut, and I got, a parent in a wealthier suburb. I got two parents in Bridgeport. I got a pastor, and, getting all those people, at the same time. And it was daily. So we might have a meeting, on a Monday to talk about what we might get, but we all had, everybody had balls in the air.
Yeah.
You never knew. And we had shows where we were on air, and it was a New York Times reporter, and he just didn't show up.
Yes.
Like he fell asleep. That happens. But and we continued to do it a little after the pandemic, for another 50 shows or so about 300 shows. So that was a completely new skill for me. I mean, even though it's not really, when you think about it, dissimilar to being an editor, and I was an editor at a local paper for a while.
Yes. Yep.
Where you're creating content and you're planning it and scheduling it. But you had more hands, even at a local paper, there were more hands, so, and this was very topical. So, I mean, I was always reading, watching the news until midnight, and I'd see a guest and say, I got to get her, she's, whatever. And I did get Maria Ressa, who won a year later, won the Nobel Peace Prize. And she came on our show and I called Sriya, said, I haven't, I knew she was in a trial, and I saw it on Twitter, and then I contacted her, and anyway, so in the midst of this court case, which is ongoing, but she came on the show and just was amazing, talking about democracy and the threat. So that was a big moment to get somebody like that and see her win the Nobel Peace Prize was very cool.
It is, and I mean, one of the things that I've always found is that at the end of the day, we're all people. I interviewed someone this week who wrote a very influential book in sales. But Brent is just an ordinary person like all of us, and he's very, I wrote a book, and he's and I didn't realize it was going to be. Didn't really realize what was going to be happening to it. And people are people, and if they see that you're doing good, then they're more than happy to support.
Yeah. And so Maria Ress knew me from A Woman to Follow, and was supporting that idea, and she was in her eye, and we said, well, how do you live with this fear that you could be jailed any minute? She said, well, I wake up in the morning, and I just, I look up at the sun, and I say the glass is half full, and I'm just going to power on, it's just.
And we've had people through history that have had to do that. And unfortunately, I'm a person that always feels they have to be stand up and be counted. And so, but it's great that we have people that are willing to do that.
Yeah. So I did that, so I suddenly had these skills of, I learned some, a lot of tech that I didn't know. I'd never been on, on air, I'm always behind the scenes. And as an investigative reporter, you don't want to, you want to be kind of quiet. You don't really want to, you get more information that way sometimes. So that was all new. And then two doctors wanted to do a podcast, two women doctors, about the pandemic and, giving people truth, versus false news, so I became a producer on that and helped conceive the name of the show, and which was called She's on Call, the idea that doctors are always on call. And these women were telling us stories of how, they'd go to a concert and somebody, the band, drummer would turn to them at the end, if they saw that, if they were saying hello, and say, well, could you look at this on my back? Should I see a doctor? So anyway, that was a great experience, and getting a whole exposure And doctors are really big on Twitter. There's a
Yes.
whole,
Yeah.
yeah. So so that was terrific. And then people started saying, well, Rose, it was like what I was, what was I going to do next? And instead of going back and writing, stories, people said, well, why don't you do your own show? So, so I think he's here. But one of my friends that I knew through Sri is Stephen Kaplan,
he is here very much.
He is
so.
here. Yes. Hi, Stephen. Uh, so he. I didn't want to. I knew how much back work there was, and I felt like I wanted to really be able to get the best guests and ask the good questions, and not worry about, taking care of comments that were, like you're doing now. So anyway, he became my producer, and so, we chose a platform where I guess it's not Restream, it's StreamYard, but it's streamed to multiple channels, and people like now are able to comment, and I could share books and links and things like that as the guest was talking. So so I sort of evolved, I've evolved into like,
and it's fantastic, starting
Yeah.
off as an intern and then coming up with the tech and supporting your own podcast and so. And I started this by talking about the fact that you've been on a great journey, and it is, and the thing that I love about it is the fact that you have given back. You've made sure that you pass the baton on, and have used the technology to empower people across the world, which is what social media is about.
Yeah, it really, for all the bad that it can do, it really can do great things. And one of the when people would be on my been on my show, or somebody wrote to me and said, oh, you're a woman, my daughter is always like this question you said your friend's daughter asked, that with Woman to Follow and these lists I was doing, there are women that you could look up to. And while there, we know there's Michelle Obama, we know Oprah, but these are like, I would profile somebody who is just big in virtual reality, and, so sort of leaders in their field that not necessarily, not everyone would know about. And then even with tech, I interviewed a best-selling novelist, Sarah Novick, who wrote a book called wait, what am I forgetting it now? What's the title? But anyway, it was Real Talk.
Yes.
And it was, which is a word used in the deaf community for like, give me the real scoop, and so I had a translator, and that was really fascinating, to see how that worked. And I didn't know how it would work until we went to on air, because I thought the translator would be translating the English. Doing the signing, and the writer would be speaking in English, because she wasn't born deaf and she could speak, because I, did a pre-interview with her, and it was the opposite. She was more comfortable speaking and signing, and then the translator was doing both too. So anyway, it was, and you don't know until until you're live, really, with many things, how it's going to go, as you know. Right.
Yes, absolutely. Rose, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey, and thank you for everybody for their comments and the interaction.
Thank you.
Rose, tell people where they can find you.
Yes, I am Rose Horowitz 31 on Twitter, and then my name, I think on Instagram I'm also Rose Horowitz 31, and Facebook I'm Rose Horowitz. Everywhere I'm Rose Horowitz, either Rose Horowitz or Rose Horowitz 31. So, and if you follow me, usually whatever my show is, I'll usually have it on my pin tweet. I will have a the link to my last show.
Yes.
And an upcoming, and if I'm doing a new show, I will announce that. And you can always find me. And I have my own YouTube channel, which is under Woman to Follow.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Specialist woman. What a lovely what a lovely thing to say.
Yeah. And, no, it's great. He's really
Alan says wonderful conversation. Thank you, and thank you.
He's the funny guy in the house.
Is he? Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
He's not being funny though, is he?
No, he's not taking any chances, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks, Rose.
All
I really
right.
appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much.